I told my editor I was going to be concentrating on the issue of cross-dressing, but he misunderstood, so he's dug out all kinds of pictures of Eddie Izzard and the rest. That's not the cross-dressing I want to talk about. I want to talk about the truly extraordinary thing, and bear in mind that I have been in politics for more than 50 years. More than 50 years. And I have never known or even imagined in my wildest dreams that this current situation on the political spectrum would come to pass. Let's take the war. The only people opposing the war in Ukraine and the endless shoveling of tens of billions of dollars into the most corrupt regime in Europe are the people on the right of the American political spectrum, at least as far as the official political class is concerned. Dr. Cornel West running for the Green Party is, of course, totally outstanding on this subject and rightly identifying the existence of NATO as a major part of our problems and promising to wind it up if he, in the unlikely event, becomes president. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., ditto. But I'm talking about in the Senate, in the House of Representatives, and of course in the inner councils of the White House, the cross-dressing is complete. Once upon a time, in my lifetime, in the Vietnam War, for example, it was the left that were demanding an end to the war, and the right that were demanding more and more and more dead American soldiers and endless amounts of money for a losing cause, reinforcing failure, throwing good money after bad. That situation has now completely reversed. The left in American politics, as defined as the mainstream Democratic Party, which is what the media refer to when they talk about the left and the progressive side of politics, is 100% behind Joe Biden and Antony Blinken and Volodymyr Zelensky and the war machine, the military-industrial complex, the big arms companies, and I presume the top military brass, although when they retire, like Colonel Douglas MacGregor, you oftentimes get a glimpse at what the real opinions of the top military brass are. But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, these other women and men in the so-called squad are 100% behind the war. And worse, actually, even than that, they are 100% behind more and more and more censorship. I refer to my earlier point. In my lifetime, it was the left that demanded an end to censorship, the right that demanded ever more censorship. Why are you putting Galloway on the television, they would say? Not 20 years ago in the context of the Iraq War. Why are you giving Galloway all this airtime to pollute the airwaves with his anti-war messages, and also eloquently too, if I say so myself? The opposite has now happened. In Britain, the people fighting hardest against the overweening censorship of free debate, of raising questions, of testing theories, of doubting the experts, are people on the right. And the people on the so-called left are cheering as the European Union, for example, passes a law which is now in place. Who knows? I might get cut off mid-sentence here. The spreading of disinformation as defined by them and nobody else, with no recourse to any court in any land, will lead to the social media companies being told to remove, to block, and to censor the points of view that the European Union decides are disinformation. Now, in the beginning, this was only about the election cycle virus. In the beginning, this was only about people questioning the veracity of the claims made by Big Pharma, very profitable claims made by Big Pharma. But be sure it has now moved on to other political issues. Now it's the war. Tomorrow it will be something else. It will be immigration. It will be asylum seekers. It will be open borders. Anything will be defined by the European Union as disinformation, and the social media companies, however courageous or not courageous they might be, Elon Musk may be, Mark Zuckerberg, not at all courageous, but a gutless coward, and Nick Clegg, the former Deputy Prime Minister of Britain, in charge of censorship. He was a Liberal Democrat when he was in Parliament. They'll decide what can go out about a war. So there's every possibility, at least within the European Union, that anything I say, never mind anyone else, my good friend Afshan Ratansi and Going Underground are just in the memory hole now for the European public. They can only be watched and heard in the free world. Isn't that funny? We used to say we were the free world. Now we're the least free part of the world. And the day is coming, might come tonight, where anyone questioning the narrative of the prevailing orthodoxy on anything, but I'm most concerned about the war, will be ruthlessly censored. The social media companies will be fined millions of dollars for allowing access to their platforms to people with inconvenient views and arguments. That's bad, of course. It's bad in principle. It's the very antithesis of what being a Democrat is supposed to be. It's the very opposite of what the so-called left used to stand for. But it's much worse than that. It's not because it will put me out of a job. That's a mere bagatelle. It's because you, the public, will not be able to hear the Scott Ritters, the Colonel Douglas McGregors, the Mark Berletic. You'll not be able to hear the other point of view, and therefore, how can you possibly know that your government, on your dime, in your name, is doing the right thing, is going in the right direction, if you haven't heard the alternative point of view? It is the so-called left in the United States that is fully behind the CIA, fully behind the FBI, fully behind the military-industrial complex, the censorship industry, and fully behind the war. And such opposition as there is at the top level in US politics is coming from the right. That's what I meant by political cross-dressing. And I'll be exploring it with the wonderful Neil Oliver, the Coast Guy, on Twitter, and a commentator on GB News, a historian of note, and a masterful storyteller. Let's hear what he has to say about these things tonight. But let me move on to the Conservative Party. Rishi Sunak, or for American viewers, Rashid Sunak, go figure, as Joe Biden said. Mind you, Joe Biden this week said on television, live, when thanking the man who just introduced him, Pete Buttigieg, he introduced him, or referred to him rather, look away children, as Pete Buttigieg. Pete Buttigieg is his Secretary of State for Transportation. The man was standing right next to him and didn't know where to look. But the Rashid Sunak story has suddenly come back on to the agenda. It was imagined that Sunak was going to manage the decline of the Conservative Party, mitigate the scale of its upcoming defeat in the British general election next year, before Christmas of next year. But the polls, the bottom has fallen out of the Conservative Party. And one of the reasons for that, or one of the things that could have been done differently, which certainly would have mitigated it, would be for the leader of the Conservative Party to start acting like a Conservative, to start acting in ways that some of his predecessors, and I was there when they did it, would not have flinched for a second in doing. How can it be that in a Britain ruled by the Conservative Party for 13 years, that I was able to read just yesterday in Britain a notice referring to, again, children look away, people with vaginas. People with vaginas. They cannot bring themselves to say the word woman. They refuse to define what a woman is. They are enthralled by exactly the same mess of pottage that is the gender-bending, gender-fixated, sexually obsessed centre ground in British politics that I call Blairism. They are in love with Tony Blair. They follow every word and anticipate every thought that emanates from Tony Blair's mind, which is social liberalism to its extreme, to the nth degree, combined with a laissez-faire attitude to economic and social problems in Britain, that is the least conservative thing I have ever seen. We still get lunatics on social media talking about how this Tory government is the most right-wing Tory government that has ever been. You people never lived through Margaret Thatcher, for God's sake. This is not a Conservative government. This is a Liberal government with a small L. It's a Liberal government in all but name. And it's the liberalism that's killing them after all. If you really want a Liberal government, why would you want a Conservative Party at the head of it? If you really want thousands of people to cross the English Channel in rubber dinghies, almost all of them men, almost all of them men of fighting age, who've lost their passports but managed to hold on to their mobile phones, to then be billeted in some of England's best 3- and 4-star hotels. Why would you want a Conservative government to preside over it? If you really want all of these liberal nostrums to be the prevailing orthodoxy in this country, why not give another Liberal, Sir Keir Starmer, a chance? These are the issues that are going to do for Rishi Sunak. Because knowing the Conservative Party as I do, once upon a time the most efficient political organisation on the planet, which ruthlessly dispatched its leaders, even its most revered leaders, with a knife in the back. Winston Churchill, Margaret Thatcher, knifed in the back, both of them. Then, if you're going to knife Margaret Thatcher, you're not going to balk at Rashid Sunak. This man is a cipher. He is a nothing. He stands for nothing. And very shortly, also, he has no bottom. He has no presence. He has no gravitas. He can't speak. He doesn't look right. There's something of the spiv about him. And it's not a very pleasant look. As I've said to you before, most conservatives in this country think we should still be ruling India, not that an Indian should be ruling us. Moreover, an Indian on the make, an Indian who married a billionaire-ess, and whose father-in-law, by the way, is still doing a roaring trade in both Russia and China, when our companies are being stopped from doing any business with Russia and much business with China. Huawei out the door. Rishi Sunak's father-in-law's business doing a roaring trade in China. This man is so flimsy, so insubstantial. It is a wonder that it has taken so long. But it's now happening. There's something for viewers overseas called the 1922 Committee. Crazy name, crazy people. These are the men, overwhelmingly men, in grey suits. They are the men that go to one Tory leader after another once they have outlived their usefulness. And their usefulness is only measured, only, by whether or not the members of Parliament can hold their seats at the next election, or whether they're going to have to go out and try and ply their trade elsewhere in an inhospitable market. The 1922 Committee governs the business of the Conservative Party in Parliament in Britain. And if enough members of Parliament submit motions of no confidence, then automatically a new election contest is triggered. Now, I know there have been an awful lot of them, and it's quite hard to keep up. Somebody called Grant Shapps is now in charge of the war effort. Well, you know him as Grant Shapps. I know him as a Mr. Green, because our new war leader actually has multiple aliases and invents customer comments effusively praising the various businesses, failed businesses, that he was hitherto involved in, and he invented every single one of those quotes. So Mr. Green, or Mr. Shapps, is now in charge of the Light Brigade, to which I shall return in a minute. But the Conservative Party will not sit by for very much longer and wait for Rashid Sunak to ride them into the guns. These are not the gallant 600. There's nothing gallant about the Conservative Party in Parliament. They are concerned only with their own individual prospects at the upcoming general election. So my view is that Rashid Sunak is toast. And these letters, I'm told, are now coming in thick and fast. So expect a challenge to the leadership of the Conservative Party before the autumn leaves have stopped falling. Lastly, on the war, because I'm about to speak to Brian Belichick, who knows more about war than almost anybody anywhere in the media market. The charge of the gallant 600 into the guns at the Battle of Balaclava took place, in case you don't know it, in a place called Crimea. It was called the Crimean War. It was a precursor to the First World War, and the levels of slaughter and carnage that were experienced in that war had never hitherto been seen in the history of warfare in the world. We may now be about to have another Crimean War, because the increasingly exposed and corrupted regime in Kiev have really only got one last shot. Their offensive, their counter-offensive, has failed and failed and failed again. The game-changing equipment materiel, weapons that were supposed to arrive and turn the tide have all failed miserably. Do you remember the Abrams tank, the Chieftain tanks, the F-16s, the depleted uranium bombs that the departing Ben Wallace bestowed on the people of Ukraine? None of these weapons has made a blind bit of difference. There's only one thing left, and that's to provoke a nuclear war. And that nuclear war will be provoked in any one of many circumstances, but the most significant of those circumstances is if NATO makes a serious effort on the ground to recapture Crimea. If they show the slightest sign of being in a position to conquer the Crimean Peninsula, then the World War is on. Because for the Russians, that is an existential matter. And a tactical nuclear weapon, or two, or three, will be fired at the Ukrainian forces if they so much as seem to be ready to encroach on the Russian territory of Crimea. A new Crimean War, anyone? Well, let's see what Brian Belichick thinks. He's coming up right after this. It's the mother of all talk shows.